We are now in 2023, which means it has now almost been 6 years since the Nintendo Switch originally released, which means we're probably gonna hear about Nintendo's next console at some point soon, especially because there have been quite a few leaks and rumors going around that Nintendo is rolling out the last major games of the Nintendo Switch's lifecycle, and we could be seeing this new console as early as next year. So with all that in mind, I've decided to come up with my top 10 things that I want the next Nintendo console to have. And even though this is a top 10 list and I want all of these things so badly to be in the next Nintendo console, I do have these ranked from what I think is the least important to the most important to be included in this next gaming system. And as always, this list is comprised completely of my opinions, so if you guys have a different top 10 ranking of things you want to see in the next Nintendo console, make sure to let me know down in the comments below. I love seeing what ideas you guys have. So with all that out of the way, let's roll the intro and get into my top 10 things I want to see in the next Nintendo console. Now, the first thing on this list that I want to talk about is bringing back the Virtual Console from the Wii and Wii U. Now, I want this more than almost anything else on this list, and I feel like it should be in a more important spot, but I decided not to waste one of those more important spots because it's almost guaranteed Nintendo won't be bringing this back. The subscription service formula that they have with the Switch right now just makes them so much more money that from a business standpoint, it does not make sense at all to bring back this way of buying classic Nintendo games. That being said, I think it would have been a crime for me to not include the Virtual Console on this list because it was one of my favorite things about the Wii and Wii U. It was so cool to just be able to hop on the eShop and find whatever Nintendo retro games that you're looking for. Obviously, it didn't have all of them, but still it had a giant selection of Nintendo's classic library, and for a much better price than if you were to go and find a physical copy, given that retro gaming has been getting more and more expensive. Another huge advantage of Virtual Console when compared to Switch Online is that you actually get to own the games that you buy. With Switch Online, if you ever cancel your subscription at any point, then you lose all the games that came with it. But even if I think Nintendo is going to be sticking to the subscription formula, I think there still could be a way they could implement the ability to own retro games on this next console. Imagine if for the time that you played on Nintendo Switch Online, or whatever the online service for this next console will be, you earned points. And at the end of the year of your subscription, you could cash in your points to actually own some of the games from the service. Different games would have different price values depending on what console they were on, as well as how popular the game is generally, and depending on the tier of the subscription service you have, you might get more points for playing than on a lower tier. For example, if you had the expansion pack, you might get 1.3 points for every 1 point that you might get if you had just the base online service. Now that Nintendo's discovered the subscription service formula, I feel like this is the closest thing we could get to getting Virtual Console back. And honestly, I'd be super happy with this, even though I would prefer it to come back in its form from the Wii and Wii U. And our next entry on this list is another thing that I think Nintendo should bring back from the Wii and Wii U, and that is having more of a focus on the Miis. Now, the Miis obviously aren't entirely removed from the Switch. I mean, we got a port of a 3DS game to the Switch, Miitopia, which is centered completely around them, but they aren't nearly as in the spotlight as they were on the Wii, Wii U, and even on the 3DS. To get to the Mii Maker on the system, there's no longer even a dedicated application, and instead you have to go through multiple settings menus to even make a Mii. And once you've actually made your Mii, you can't even use it in any of the system's UI other than your profile picture. Back on the Wii U, the Miis were integrated so well into all of the system's main features, and the same thing can be said for the Wii and the 3DS. Though I do keep mainly mentioning the Wii U because I think that's where Miis were represented the best in a Nintendo console. As soon as you turn on the console, you'll see all your Miis rushing into the plaza, and they'll even do a little bit of a dance and clap for you if it's your birthday. And they were also integrated so well into multiple of the main system apps. For example, on the internet browser, if you press X on the gamepad, then the main screen will then have curtains close over it, and a Mii will do a little bit of a show for you while you can still browse the internet on the gamepad. It's these little charming details that I think really make Nintendo consoles, and it seems that the Switch has definitely been lacking a lot of them. However, that is for a different topic later in this video. The bottom line is, I think Miis are an essential feature to have in the next Nintendo console, and hopefully they won't be sidelined as much as they were with the Switch. They are pretty much the perfect avatars for a Nintendo console, and I really can't think of anything better, as much as Nintendo might try with things such as the Sports Mates from Nintendo Switch Sports, which I severely hope that they don't switch over to for their main avatar. I feel like Nintendo just needs to bring back what they already know works with the Miis. I don't see any reason why they might be trying to get rid of them, and I hope they realize that and bring them back in the next console. But even though I'm done talking about how Nintendo needs to focus more on the Miis with the next console, we are not done talking about the Miis just yet, because our next point is that Nintendo needs to bring back some form of community interaction like they had on the Wii with the Everybody Votes channel, or like they had on the Wii U with Miiverse. For those of you who aren't aware, Miiverse was pretty much a social media platform built into the Wii U itself, and all of it was of course themed around Nintendo games and all their communities. You can post achievements you've made in certain games, or just ask for help if you're stuck on a certain level. And overall, Miiverse was such a cool way of connecting Nintendo players around the globe. You could even make little drawings similar to PictoChat on the DS, and this specific feature of Miiverse was ingrained so much into the original Splatoon that Miiverse still somewhat lives on the Nintendo Switch with Splatoon 2 and 3, because you can still do these very same drawings, and they'll appear in the main hub area of those games. This hub of digital communities that Nintendo made for their fans really felt special back on the Wii U, and I really hope that they bring something similar to it to the next Nintendo console. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this segment of the video, Nintendo also did something similar to this, however not to the same scale as Miiverse, back on the Wii with the Everybody Votes channel. While its overall concept was pretty different from Miiverse, it was still a really cool way of having community interaction in a Nintendo console. As the name implies, this channel allowed you to put different questions and topics to a vote for everybody to vote on, and then you could see the outcome after the voting session had ended. I think even if it's just small scale like the Everybody Votes channel, or something much larger like Miiverse, Nintendo needs to implement some form of community interaction into their next console, especially given that Sony and Microsoft with their PlayStation and Xbox consoles respectively have implemented a vast array of community interaction features in their gaming systems already, so Nintendo really does need to start catching up. But our next item on this list, though it is something pretty minor, it is a complaint that many people have had with the existing Nintendo Switch, including myself, and I think it is pretty important for it to be in the next Nintendo console, and that is having larger controllers that attach to the system itself. With the success of the Nintendo Switch, it's pretty clear that Nintendo is not going to be going back to a dedicated home console and handheld, so it seems like the hybrid concept is here to stay. This means that we're going to need a new controller to attach to the sides of the system like the Joy-Con we have now. However, I do hope these controllers are not only bigger, but overall more ergonomic as well. If you're ever playing the Switch in docked mode or even tabletop mode, you're most likely going to be using the Nintendo Switch Pro Controller, which obviously is meant to have some advantages over the Joy-Con, but the fact that if you have a Pro Controller, you're almost never going to use your Joy-Cons is a problem. Even in the comfort grip, the Joy-Cons are still pretty uncomfortable to hold, to the point where you can't play your games for all that long without your hands starting to cramp up, and if you have them in single Joy-Con mode, the problem intensifies even more. This might just be a problem for people with big hands like myself, but I feel like Nintendo should really try and make their controllers at least slightly bigger to attach to the sides of the console. That way people with big hands don't necessarily have to go out and buy an expensive additional controller. I think this would make more than enough sense for Nintendo to implement in their next console, especially given that buying a new set of Joy-Cons is already more expensive than buying a Nintendo Switch Pro Controller, meaning that it would make a lot of sense for Nintendo to incentivize people to buy the more expensive product. And in doing so, since these successors to the Joy-Cons would be packaged in with the next Nintendo console, they'll cause more people to continue to play their new console and therefore buy more games for it, given that they'll have a much more comfortable experience playing their games even if they don't want to go out and buy a new controller. I'm also aware that alternatives to the Joy-Cons that are larger do exist, like the Hori Split Pad and Split Pad Pro. However, those are lacking in a lot of features the Joy-Cons have as well. For example, they don't have Amiibo support or HD Rumble compatibility. If Nintendo themselves made these larger controllers, not only would they probably have all the technologies that the Joy-Con have right now, but it's possible that they could add in some new things for this new console. And not to mention, they wouldn't have to split the profits of larger controllers with a third party, given that people wouldn't be going to other companies to have to buy larger controllers for their Nintendo console. These controllers being larger could also allow them to feature a different kind of control stick than what the Joy-Cons currently have, possibly eliminating Joy-Con drift for good, which is something Nintendo fans have been begging for ever since the Switch originally released. Just as much, in fact, as they've been asking Nintendo to implement our next point, which is adding themes. And while I think it might be a little late in the Switch's life cycle to implement something as major as themes, I think it needs to be in the next console. Now, Nintendo obviously knows what themes are. I mean, the 3DS had a ton of them. So seeing themes implemented in the next Nintendo console doesn't seem out of the question in any way. But the amount of effort Nintendo decides to put into these themes is definitely up for debate. I mean, realistically, they could just slap a few PNGs together, charge $5 for it, and call it a day. But I think there could be a better system Nintendo could implement for these themes that would both benefit them and the players as well. First of all, I think some basic themes should come pre-installed with your Switch. Kind of like the basic white and basic black we have now, but with a wider variety of colors to choose from. And as you buy games for the console, you'll be able to get one free theme that's related to that game that you've bought. If you want to get more themes from that game, then you'll have to pay, say, $5 per theme. The developers of each game that comes to this console would be required to include at least one theme with the game. And these can just be a simple picture of maybe the box art or something that goes on the background of the UI of the console. However, some themes could have the opportunity to go more in depth than this. For example, recoloring some of the buttons on the home screen. I feel like themes could be so easy for Nintendo to implement in their next console, whether it just be a few PNGs thrown together or something as complex as the system I just described. And the concept of themes overall would really help in making your console feel like your own. But themes aren't the only customizability option I have on this list, because I think Nintendo could go a step further with custom UI. Now, at first you might think this is just another way of saying themes, and though I think this custom UI would probably be integrated into some themes, it would also be changeable even without any themes themselves. To better illustrate my point, take a look at my modded Switch, which has a custom theme installed that also has bundled with it some custom UI. As you can see, all the UI elements from the normal Switch home menu have been moved around, and this is exactly the kind of customization I really want to see in the next Nintendo console. Imagine if you had the ability to choose from multiple different preset UI layouts, or you could possibly just move around where you want your games to show up, as well as the other UI elements and buttons on the screen. This, when combined with themes, could take the customization of the next Nintendo console to a whole new level, and I would absolutely love to see this. Another thing that I think could be added to this custom UI is a trope of many smartphones being widgets. What if you wanted to see on your home screen the time trial leaderboard for one of the tracks in the newest Mario Kart game? Or what if you wanted to see what maps are in the rotation for Splatoon at the time? The possibilities are practically endless, especially because more and more games with different widgets associated with them would be coming to this new console constantly. While at face value this might seem like a pretty minor detail to have on a top 10 list, I think this could actually have a severe impact on how we use our Nintendo console. But for our next item on this list, it's no secret that the Switch is honestly pretty underpowered. I mean, when Nintendo went from the GameCube to the Wii, they did not focus on improving the power of the console at all, making them pretty much an entire generation behind in terms of power. The same can then be said from the Wii U to the Switch, because even though the Switch is slightly more powerful than the Wii U, at its core, it's pretty much just a portable version of its predecessor. So that makes Nintendo behind almost 2 whole generations in terms of the power of their consoles. And that's mostly worked out for them up to this point. Nintendo and the studios that they work with are so good at optimizing their games for the Switch that there are some games on this console that look absolutely stunning. And the same can be said for the Wii U as well. But as the ambitions of developers get larger and larger, it's more and more difficult for the Switch to handle these very demanding games. Take, for example, the new Xenoblade game, which looks absolutely phenomenal, though it has had a few performance issues. And the same can be said for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. However, I don't know if I could say that game looks phenomenal. Though that is mainly a problem with Game Freak not properly optimizing their game, it would help a little bit if the console they were working with had more power so they didn't have to try and optimize as much. And countless other games, even though they might run perfectly well, are somewhat being held back by the Switch's lack of power? What if the reason we haven't gotten a new 3D Mario since Mario Odyssey, and no, Bowser's Fury doesn't count even though it's an amazing game, it's a side mode, is because it's meant to be some kind of super expansive open world that still has the same level of detail as the environments from the original Super Mario Odyssey. Something like that just isn't feasible to happen on the Switch. I mean, even if you look at Breath of the Wild, which is an absolutely gorgeous game, its vast open environment makes it so a lot of the textures look pretty low res if you get up close to them. I'm not saying we need something as powerful as the next gen consoles with the PS5 and the Xbox Series S and X. However, I do think we need something that's at least as powerful as the PS4 and preferably somewhat more powerful. Ideally, I feel like this next console would be 1080p in handheld mode and 4K in docked mode. However, I'd still be more than happy to have just 720p still in handheld mode and 1440p or even just 1080p with some anti-aliasing in docked mode. The main point here is that developers won't have to hold back their creative ideas for the sake of having the game run well on the underpowered system they're developing it for. And hopefully games for this new console aren't the only ones that run well, because our next point is that this console really needs to be backwards compatible with the current Nintendo Switch. As of right now, the Nintendo Switch has a whopping 4,466 games. And since the next Nintendo console is almost definitely going to be a hybrid, hopefully all of those games will be playable on it, given that it will probably use the same kind of cartridges. However, there then comes the issue of will these games take advantage of this new console's extra power. Nintendo's last attempt with backwards compatibility was with the Wii U and the Wii, and if you were to play a Wii game on the Wii U, it couldn't take advantage of any of the Wii U's extra power, and instead the system would revert to a state where it's only able to use the exact amount of processing power that the original Wii had. Even if you had the Wii U set to output a higher resolution, the games themselves would still be running at 480p. This is very different from what other gaming companies have been doing. For example, both PlayStation and Xbox allow you to play games from the previous generation on their next-gen consoles. And in doing so, you get to utilize the full power of the machine you're playing the games on, having you get faster load times as well as playing in a higher resolution or frame rate. I feel like this is the route Nintendo should go with their next console, given that there are quite a few games on the Switch that are pretty compromised by its low amount of power. I feel like this could be very much remedied by allowing the older games to take advantage of the newer hardware. What I am slightly afraid of, however, is Nintendo could purposefully make their next console not be backwards compatible. The Switch obviously wasn't backwards compatible with the Wii U, given that the Wii U took discs, and the Nintendo Switch, since it was a hybrid console, opted to take cartridges instead. This gave Nintendo the option of porting over a bunch of older Wii U games to the Switch, some with some added features and others that were pretty bare bones. And these ports, believe it or not, have made some of the most money out of any of the Switch's games. I mean, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is still the best-selling Switch game by a pretty decent margin. What I'm really hoping is that Nintendo does not decide to be selfish and make the next console not backwards compatible, so then they can port over a bunch of Switch games in a either higher resolution or just with some extra content. And while of course that extra content would be nice, what would be nicer is being able to play the entire Nintendo Switch's library on Nintendo's next console. But then the second to last item on this list is something that I think Nintendo had a huge missed opportunity with on the Switch, and that is having menu music. Nintendo consoles ever since the GameCube have had menu music, all the way up until the Switch, where when you boot up the console, all you're met with when you first see the menu is silence. There's not even an eShop theme, which in my opinion is an absolute injustice, given that the DSi and Wii Shop themes, as well as the eShop themes from the Wii U and 3DS, are some of the best songs Nintendo have made outside of their actual games. My hope is that in their next console, Nintendo goes all out with the menu music, similar to how they did once again on the Wii U. Every single different system menu had its own separate theme on the Wii U, and all of them were so good. And that is not an exaggeration. The Wii U had menu themes for the main menu, the setup, the parental controls, the settings, the friend list, the daily log. The download management, the system transfer, the amiibo settings, the notifications, the eShop, the Wii U chat, the Mii Maker, and Miiverse. Not only that, but the songs were mixed differently on the TV and the gamepad. That way, if you had the audio of both devices on, you would be able to hear the full song. The eShop even had multiple different themes throughout the Wii U's life cycle, and it even had custom ones for the holidays. If Nintendo puts even a fraction of the effort that they put into the Wii U system music into the system music of their next console, then I bet it will be absolutely incredible. And this might not seem like it warrants being in the second place spot for these most important things that I think should be on the next Nintendo console, but menu music, in my opinion, is one of the most important things a console can have. And I will go more in depth on that in the final point of this video, which is that the next Nintendo console overall just needs to have more charm. I've already alluded to this earlier in the video when I was talking about the Miis and how they need to come back, mainly because they were some of the most charming aspects of the Wii, Wii U, and 3DS. The same can also be said about Miiverse and the Everybody Votes channel. All of these things were just bursting at the seams with classic Nintendo charm. And that's what makes a Nintendo console feel special, what makes it feel like a Nintendo console, and frankly, the Nintendo Switch doesn't. The games on the console are just as good as ever, sure, but the actual system itself is lacking pretty much all of the fun little details that you would normally find in Nintendo's previous systems. The Mii Maker, it's now tucked away in the back of settings and with nothing in its UI other than what needs to be there. The news menu, the gallery, the settings, they're all just rectangles on top of a stark white or black background. The eShop is the thing with the most color out of all the menus, and the most it has is just an orange bar on the side of the screen, and once again, no music. It's like Nintendo was so afraid for their console to be a commercial failure like the Wii U was, that they decided to scrap everything from that previous console, including the things that made that console and all the ones that came before it so special. Even though the Switch is Nintendo's second most successful console of all time, right behind the DS, I think it has made the single largest mistake out of all of Nintendo's history of making gaming systems. And that was losing its personality, its wacky charm, its full focus on just simply fun that made the Nintendo that we know and love. So my final wish in this video for the next Nintendo console is that Nintendo decides to go back to what made them special, to what made them stand out from other gaming systems in the past. Because I think that charm that past Nintendo consoles were chock full of is just as important, if not more important, as the innovation Nintendo is known just as well for. But what do you all think? Do you think the controllers that attach to the side of the next Nintendo console actually need to be smaller, not bigger, and I'm just crazy? Let me know down in the comments below, and while you're down there, you might as well like the video. If you got this far in the video, you probably did like it. And if you want to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe. It really helps out the channel, and you guys get notified whenever I upload more videos like this one. So with all that out of the way, thank you all for watching. I'm Jacob with the Game Block, signing off.